back. Did you enjoy the breakout sessions? Good fun. I heard some great sessions going on along the top there, and some of the problem-solving tweets that we've had coming out over the last hour. By the way, we've jumped up a session. We're now trending number 2 in Melbourne. We're competing now with Married at First Sight. Just to give you some context of the gravitas of our event here today. So we're competing against Ines and Sam. I appreciate how disturbing that is, that I even know who they are. I'll blame that on my wife. She says she's trying to keep me relevant and current, but that's another topic altogether. Now we're going to hear from another future young leader. This guy makes me feel old as a Gen Y. He's the CEO of MEQ Probe, a company that has pioneered a new solution that uses spectral analysis to determine the quality of meat in just a few seconds. Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a fascinating session. Please give a huge welcome to Geordie Kitschy.
G'day everyone, my name's Geordie Kitschy. I'm a 4th generation sheep and cropping farmer from South Australia, and I now run a company called MEQ Probe. I'd just like to say a quick thank you to AgriFutures and their sponsors, including Westpac, Elders and Visy, for putting a show like this on. I think it's incredibly timely, and I'd also like to thank them for having the guts to let young people like us come up here and have our say. I'm here today to talk to you about how we can make Australia the global hub of agtech. So I think the most important question to ask ourselves is why do we want to become the global hub of agtech? And there's a number of reasons. So I don't think anyone argues the fact that we need new technologies to become more sustainable and more profitable. So why wait around for the rest of the world to develop these technologies when we can build them here and export them to the rest of the world? By building agtech here, that gives our agribusinesses a competitive advantage against the rest of the world. Another great thing about technology is that you don't need to live in a major city to build it, which means that we can create exciting, high-paying jobs for young people in our regions to ensure long-term sustainability for them for decades to come. So how do we go about creating ourselves as the global leader in agtech? I think we need to do 2 things really well. We need to collaborate and we need to invest in our people. Our farmers are already recognised as some of the best in the world, along with many of the businesses up and down our supply chains. We have some of the best researchers in the world, not just in agriculture, but across all disciplines. And we have a growing critical mass of entrepreneurs that are keen to build solutions for our agriculture industries. So in 5 years' time, I would like to see all of these parties working together in an ecosystem where they're creating real solutions, not only for our industry, but the world's. There's a lot of talk about cross-disciplinary collaboration in our education and research sectors. And I think agriculture is a perfect way to bring real-world application into our STEM. And that's not just for the kids that want to go to university, but also our regional kids. The great thing about technology is you don't need to live in a major city. You can learn to develop technology, and you can develop technology anywhere you can take a laptop. Finally, to help our agtech startups get across the valley of death when they're trying to take an idea from research through to a product, we need to create ways for agtech startups to access capital. We have a huge amount of research funding that gets allocated to research each year. It'd be great to see more of this money flow through the pipeline to commercialisation to allow agtech startups to execute on products. And this doesn't mean we have to rob Peter to pay Paul. Through getting these 3 parties to work closely together, we can leverage each dollar even harder and get more bang for our buck. In summary, I'd like to suggest that we allocate more of our research dollars further along the commercialisation pipeline to productisation into startups like. I'd also like to see state and federal support for technological education and training so we can build capacity in the people that are going to lead this sector for the coming generations. I'd also encourage people to think about, no matter what institution you work in, what you can do to remove barriers, to encourage these three parties to work together so that we can become the global leader in building and exporting ag tech. Thank you.
Thanks, Geordie. All right, great to hear from Geordie there, and all of the future young leaders that we've had on stage today have been fantastic. We've got another interactive session now, so again, get out your phones, get onto the Evoke Ag app, because the panel session that we're going to do now, we want some questions from you, and we'll be running that at the end of the sessions. We'll be putting 3 of the questions up to the panel to ask, so please do get any of the questions that you've got that you hear as a result of the discussion that you're going to see on the stage now. This is going to be talking about supply chains, the value chains, cold chains, and of course, the big chain that we've all been hearing about, blockchain, over the last 12 months. This has nothing to do with Bitcoin, though. This is all about blockchain and how it's transforming supply chain to give consumers now more insights into the future. This is a connected conversation. This is stuff that I'm really passionate about because tech sits at the heart of how we're changing how we interact and engage with each other. And it's bringing our consumers, our customers, closer to the supply chain than we've ever had before in history. This session is proudly brought to us by Visy, and as I said, is another one of our interactive sessions. So ladies and gentlemen, to share their insights, please welcome to stage in order, Paul Herbash from Australia Post, Professor Alice Woodhead from the University of Southern Queensland, Rinaju Ram, the CEO of Blockbit Solutions, and our session facilitator for today, Richard Macheski.
Good afternoon, everybody. Looks like we're on the graveyard shift and only stopping you going to get some food and drink, so we'll make ourselves as timely as possible. Just wanted to firstly introduce myself. My name is Richard McKasey. I'm the General Manager of Insights and Innovation at Visy. We generally look at everything new that comes through the Visy network. And I'm really lucky today to have a panel that I had a little bit of a hand in selecting, so chose it specifically to try and capture all parts of the supply chain. I've got Rinaju Ram from Blockbit Solutions, who looks at everything technical, and we'll talk a little bit about it not being a cryptocurrency. Alice Woodhead from the University of Southern Queensland, didn't add the East in, who has basically done a lot of work in understanding what value chains might be of the future and how they would affect not only the farmer, but right through to a consumer, and understanding the trends. And Paul Hirschbach, who heads up growth at Australia Post, who has been a great partner with Visy and is looking at a number of solutions to be able to change and develop what the supply chain might look like today and into the future. So just to give a little bit of a background of individually, Rinaju, would you perhaps start, just give us a little bit of background about Blockbit and why it isn't a cryptocurrency related technology?
Thanks, Richard, and thank you everyone for attending. First, in Blockbit Solutions, what we do, the name Blockbit doesn't come from blockchain, it comes from security. So Blockbit technology is all about security and the security we create. We work with emerging technologies. We've created our own traceability platform. Everyone is talking about farmer to fork traceability, just not in the agriculture, but every industry now wants to see transparency across the whole supply chain. We work with IoT, blockchain, data science, digital identity, and security, of course.
Great. I mean, data's been an enormous theme of here, and obviously technology and everything associated with it, so it creates a whole range of new issues that we haven't yet thought of. Alice, would you be able to just give us a bit of background, obviously, of yourself and the work done at the University of South Queensland, or Southern Queensland?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Yeah, at the University of Southern Queensland, we're in the midst of the Darling Downs in Toowoomba, and so we're a very rich agricultural production zone of beef, horticulture, grains. And traditionally, Australia has been a commodity exporter, and what we've been doing at the university is crossing over with the product development and looking at how we can really add value to the parts of the animal, for instance, the beast, that is generally lower valued. And so the team, for instance, we might take a beef product and say, okay, the highest value is the ribeye steak, but there's very little value put on the tough blade cuts. So can we turn them into broths, or can we sous vide them, or can we create dried bars out of them? And then how do we tap into the Asian market and other global markets? And we particularly focus on understanding the health and well-being market and the need for protein. And traditionally, the protein markets have been serviced by soy and milk whey products, and so, but there's a lot of other protein sources. So how can we optimize these protein sources and other products that we make in Australia and create new products and tap into these emerging markets? And how do we also, in the blockchain context, connect the personal app to that person's well-being and to the authenticity of the Australian farm product?
Great, thanks, Alice. Paul, everyone knows Australia Post. It's iconic. There's a letterbox at everyone's doorstep and everyone's business. Can you give us a bit of background of, obviously Australia Post, the context of your role, but perhaps a little bit how Australia Post is evolving given the evolution of e-commerce?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Richard. So, and it's actually relevant, our half-year results came out today, and the big story there that we're announcing is the continued growth of e-commerce in Australia. So we refer that to, going online. Everyone in this room's probably done it, going online and getting something delivered to their door. So we've seen over the past probably 10 years, growth rates of 10, 20, 30% in that area, to the point where it now exceeds what our traditional letters business. So probably just over one half of our business now just supports e-commerce. So my role within that e-commerce business is to look at our growth products. So I've got one of the better jobs, I reckon, at Post. There's a few of us, so I reckon that's pretty good. But I get to look at new markets, new products, and new activities, and that's the context in which I'm here today.
Yeah, great. I mean, we enjoyed the preview of the US market and just how quickly it's expanded just recently, and it's amazing to see the growth that happens just overnight and how quickly Australia can pick up the trends from overseas markets. Alice, I know with your work, would you be able to probably share, and I know it's always hard, you translate a trend into the opportunity, but as a grower or a primary producer in the audience, how would you best, I suppose, identify or characterise some of the trends that you're seeing in Asia and how they might affect us directly today?
Yeah, well, obviously Asia has traditionally had a very different diet to the Western diet that we have here in Australia, and so what we've tended to do is to sell Western products into the Asian market, which has serviced the expats or the wealthy Asians that have travelled to Australia and or from other international places into Asia. And what we've noticed is that we're missing a very large market, 1 billion people or so that aren't actually engaging with Australian products. And there's also a major trend going on in Asia in that as they adapt to some different diets, then the diabetes and health and wellness issues are starting to come up. And whereas we've evolved with exercise routines and gym junkies, etc., the Asian market is still catching up with that trend. And so what we're noticing is that there's a need for them to understand more about health and diet and to connect to that product. And they're also very focused on the authenticity of these products and being able to connect back to the grower and back to the traits of that. So we're looking at how we can more align the products rather than being juicy and tender meat, but more, say, gives you bone strength or good for diabetics and those type of messaging.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Alice. I think with the level of authenticity and that genuine from Australia type product or the nature of the product that people are after, I think that's becoming more and more a crucial piece to communicate. And I suppose, Rianju, that sort of comes back to you in terms of, I know I've got to get it out, you've got to explain blockchain in very layman's terms for those who haven't yet got their head around it. And but just in terms of that, then how blockchain's starting to facilitate even the authenticity element of product into Asia. Can you sort of expand on that for us?
So I think the first thing that I want to say is that a lot of people seem to think that blockchain is the silver bullet or it's the answer to our problem. End of the day, blockchain is just a distributed ledger. It's a secure distributed ledger. It's not the source where the data is coming from. The data has to come from a validated source. The distributed ledger or the blockchain allows us to store the data in a secure manner, and it's everybody that is part of that supply chain then accesses the data, and they all have a copy of that database. Therefore, if one person tries to alter the data, it will generate an alert for every other party that is part of the supply chain to say somebody's trying to alter. So it's foolproof, it creates transparency, it creates trust, it's a single digital identity for everyone that's a user on that platform, and that's the beauty of blockchain. And it has got nothing, the business use case of blockchain is very different to how everyone is talking about that in the crypto world. So the business use case that we've got at the moment in terms of the whole supply chain traceability is ensuring that we are securing and storing the data on a distributed ledger, which is the blockchain.
So how you visualize that as a consumer, how you physically see that is more related to the device or the packaging or the medium to which you're interacting, apps, whatever it might be. You're not actually physically seeing the blockchain as such.
No.
It's a repercussion of that secure ledger.
Yeah. So in layman's terms, we've got Visy here, we've got a researcher here, we've got Australia Post, there's a logistics side of it. So the four of us are part of a group of consortium. Visy, we're relying on Visy to create the tamper-proof packaging for us, but then we've also got IoT devices that are on it, for example, QR code, barcodes, NFC tags that are on it, that is tracking that package or the product throughout the supply chain while Australia Post they're delivering that. And then we've got the research side of it, where the researchers are providing information that we're all capturing it on the same platform. So that allows us to provide the complete traceability right down to the consumer, and the consumer can see where that package has come from, where the foods come from, where who was the grower, who was the manufacturer, who was the logistics handler of that, how many people have handled it across the process, what the wholesaler's done with it, what the distributor's done with it, and what the supermarket's done with it. So it's creating that transparency throughout the supply chain, and every information that we've captured at each of the points is then captured on the blockchain, which is the distributed ledger.
Right. I know that, I don't know if anyone attended the masterclass that Visy held earlier today, but the development of technology, and I suppose we would call ourselves technology or device agnostic, in the sense that our expertise in creating packaging and just throwing it through or following it through our supply chain, where it goes from the manufacturing process through to recycling, post-consumer, and then back into packaging. One of the key things that we see is obviously incorporating technology. So from my perspective and my group, what we work on is how can we make every box smart?
Exactly.
Now, there's a lot of ways that people have started to work out how to bypass even some of the most basic things like QR codes and some of the more basic technologies. As this evolves, and as some of the technologies that we're following, printed electronics, near-field communication type devices, and there's some devices that we saw here today, even in the pitch tent. It just seems there's a lot of data coming, and my sensitivity to a lot of our customers is how much data do you have, and how much data do you need, and how much data are you actually going to use? So if I start adding it on the packaging, that's one element of it, but I know as you move through supply chains, the traceability part of things and the visibility is becoming more a requirement. And I know that some of the growers in here would hate to have a conversation based on perhaps a retailer telling you, well, I know it was out of spec for a certain amount of time, now what are we going to do about it? Because I think the flow-on effect of something about that is something around food waste as well. Because as you reject product, that needs to go somewhere else. But the ability to be able to have visibility on it would be obviously an advantage to be able to solve that.
And it's not just an agriculture challenge. I mean, food is probably one of the areas that is, agriculture is one of the areas that is most affected. But every consumer now wants to know exactly where the foods come from, who's handled it, what's happened to it, and with all the allergies and stuff. But then there's other industries that are tying into it. For example, health is another big sector that's tying into that, because you are what you eat. So therefore, they want to tie into what the farmers are doing, what the agriculture sector is doing, and providing the traceability for you to manage, for every individual out there to manage your lifestyle, to monitor what you're eating, what you're doing. So the traceability is where the future's headed. We need to have platforms that allows us to do that, and as manufacturers, as growers, as retailers, we all need to come together to provide that visibility. It's not going to be a single person being able to do that. It has to be a buy-in, it has to be a consortium, a concerted effort that everyone needs to come together to create that traceability and transparency.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I don't know how much visibility I want if ultimately I was talking to an abattoir just recently and they said, we want to know from paddock right through to plate. I don't know if I want the visibility of Mary the cow or whoever it was that I'm just about to eat. I think there'd be a few fundamental issues for me to battle through from a moral standpoint there. Mm-hmm. It conjures up some different thoughts. Paul, we've done a lot of work together in the recent times, and I know that obviously Australia Post is responding to the e-commerce push, and a lot of the packaging that we've been talking about and is obviously under development as well from a thermal perspective. The whole meal kit industry and delivery of fresh product or temperature-sensitive product is becoming more and more popular. Can you sort of explain some of the things that Australia Post is doing in reaction to that or building in reaction to what is a change in supply chain?
Yes, of course, and I might take the opportunity just to talk about e-commerce generally in Australia as well. Right. So, and I'll talk about non-food e-commerce first, and then we can talk about food. So if we look at non-food e-commerce, the key measure we look at is the proportion of goods, physical goods, that are bought online. So in Australia, we're sitting around the 8.5% mark. So for every $100 of retail, about $8.50 of that happens through a retail site. So you're going onto Amazon or Catch of the Day or Iconic and you're buying your electronics, you're buying your fashion and those activities. So that translates into about 350, 400 million deliveries a year. So on our peak day at Christmas, we do about 3 million deliveries. And Australia Post delivers about 80% of all e-commerce deliveries to houses. So we've got a dominant position. So we look at that market and then we look at overseas. So if we want to start looking to other geographies, once you go to the US, the UK, you're into the 15, 16% range, so almost double what we are. So what we see is a continued growth in e-commerce volumes. And that runs usually double digit, somewhere in the low to mid-teens, around 14, 15% each year. And what happens is a pair of shoes that you used to go to a sports store and buy, you're going on and you're purchasing on that online. Yep. So the trends that have happened in that and what's happened to industries around it, particularly within electronics, apparel, is the traditional models of multiple links in the supply chain start to get removed. So what we have seen is a lot of pure e-commerce companies come up and start trading directly with their consumers. So these can be manufacturers of goods, they can be aggregators of goods, but the technology that's advanced within the e-commerce landscape means that we can, in the time of this presentation, we could have started our own e-commerce store. It is that easy now to go and do it. That problem's been solved by technology. So we look at that, we see it growing in general merchandise, but then we start looking overseas to see what are the other trends associated with it. And the strong trend we see is as consumers get more comfortable buying their shoes online, their clothes online, they tend to do it for two reasons that we find. And these are really key. So the first one is convenience, and the second is choice. So the reason people will go online instead of going to a store, I can get something that I can't get at my local store. I can access something from overseas or a brand I couldn't get, and it's the convenience. We were talking before, most e-commerce, if you talk to e-commerce vendors, the majority of orders come between 6 and 9 at night when we all go home and we're sitting on the couch, we've had our dinner, and then we place our orders. That's how it works. So convenience and choice. We look to the US and what's happening there, and we start to see food going online. So people start getting comfortable buying their shoes. Why can't I start buying my food? So moving food through a B2C supply chain is more challenging. So there's a couple of things we have to overcome. There's the economics of it, and there's also the temperature control components of it. But what we've seen, particularly in Australia, there's two big B2C movements in Australia, if you like. So the first is the grocers. So both Woolies and Coles offering home delivery. So that's an example of B2C delivery. It's a very challenging delivery model because sending trucks into streets, doing 1 or 2 or 3 drops an hour is a very uneconomical way to deliver to homes. The trick delivering to homes, you've got to deliver to a lot in a short space of time. That's the way you make it work. I've maybe given up our entire business model, but that's what Australia Post has. So it's density. It's all about density. I want to go to your house, I want to go to your house, I want to go to your house, and I want it all to be close. The denser it is, the more efficient it is. So we see that, and that's a big market. That Woolies and Coles, there's a lot of people buying that for the convenience. Choice is no different. In fact, the choice is worse. If you go onto a Coles or Woolworths site, you'll typically have a lower or a lesser range than you would have, and the whole substitution thing comes in. So that's really about convenience. The second area which we see, and we estimate it's somewhere around the 12 million units a year or packs a year, is the meal kit industry. So this is Marley Spoon, HelloFresh, Light and Easy. So it's pre-prepared meals, frozen, or it's ready-to-cook meals as well. So what these organisations are doing is taking produce, adding value to it, portioning it, giving you a recipe, giving you experience in shipping it to you. And we've seen that explode. So that's running about 30% at the moment. So we looked to that and we said, there's something changing here. The consumers are saying with convenience and choice, we want to get our food that way too. And the two that we see really around the grocery and the meal kits.
Thanks. So the best thing about knowing Paul is when my Nikes don't arrive from the Iconic, I know who I can call. The problem is he never rings or never picks up his phone after 6 o'clock when I ring him. So thanks for that. It is a complex area to set up because as you develop packs that survive in different supply chains, and time being critical, and obviously delivery on time is really important, and to be able to get the product when it's fresh. It's different if it's a pair of Nikes. They're going to survive, a little bit of rain. They might survive a couple of days delay. They're not going to go off. But as we know through one of our trials, a box of prawns into Asia is going to go off, no matter how much ice, unless it's plugged into a refrigerator. So there are some challenges there, but also the cost for somebody to not only value add a product, but then when the cost to be able to send it ambient versus refrigerated, we all know that there's a massive cost differential there. So a lot of technologies are now starting to emerge where you can pack fresh product in such a way that it'll arrive. And I know, Alice, the work that you did and the study around Toowoomba and that Lockyer Valley region there, that was one of the key things of bringing product together. Now as people start to value add their products and you've got that sort of measurement and freshness, can you sort of maybe expand a little bit on just how the idea of value adding, which is aggregation of a range of products coming into one space, and then effectively packing those and shipping them to an Asian market has got its own challenges, but then just a little bit of visibility over how the relationship of the supply chain and how that might be measured into the future.
Yeah, thanks. We've been looking at how to get products into Asia and what products to get into Asia for the last 2 or 3 years because traditional perishable products were designed to be, say, shipped by ship, and they were aged if they were meat, or pumpkins or other products would go by ship, and very limited amount of produce was actually sent by plane, and yet there was a a view that Australia could enter these markets with fresh produce. And so to an extent, we've been exploring and testing that hypothesis for quite some time. And the challenge with air freight is that it's very expensive, and it also requires quite large scale. And so when you're sending a pallet load of lettuces, it's not going to be very economical. It's going to cost you a lot, and the airline's going to be losing a lot. And you're probably aware that Toowoomba has a new airport, and they've got a freight plane going once a week, Cathay Pacific, to Hong Kong. And they have looked at developing the agricultural market extensively. And the type of products that will make sense on that are like the light and easy meals, the pre-packed meals that have a very substantial value add, because there is just not enough profit in pallet loads of vegetables or that sort of thing. And the other thing that is really imperative about this, and why packaging is important, is that the Asian market is rife with counterfeiting and fraud. And so packaging with traceability systems gives the buyers the certainty that that packet has actually come from Australia, because everything that we design and decide has got a high value means profit for somebody in Asia to shove in some other product in and take our product out and rebadge it and sell it or copy the packaging. So the value add is actually more a proposition of how do you stop value loss. It's quite easy for us to design products here that can add value, but then through the supply chain, the costs are extensive. So how do you get that product to the end market that is profitable, that hasn't lost its value along the way?
Yeah.
And part of that is scale, but part of that is also thinking about non-perishable goods, because the ambient temperature products are, as Richard has mentioned, extremely expensive. But products that you can store on the shelf, or that reheat and have very similar taste to the original product. For instance, I've been looking at broths recently, and I've noticed a lot of broths are going powdered rather than liquid. And there's a lot of solid commercial reasons why powdered broth is a lot more feasible than liquid broth, and partly because it's light and easier to transport, but because also the packaging can be more easily locked down and it can't be replaced. So those are some of the issues that when you're developing a product for the Asian market, you really need to think about that transport route and how easy it is and what the cost of getting that product in and how safe it's going to be from counterfeiting and fraud when it gets there.
It's interesting. I think, you know, as we had a dinner with a few of our customers last night, and we just talked about the idea of aggregation, and where sometimes you might have looked across the road and seen a competitor, now you might see a partner. You know, the Lockyer Valley was a great, you know, sort of geographical example, I think, of being able to have fresh produce, grain, protein, all in one area. But people perhaps operating individually of each other and thinking about their own supply chain, worried about the product. But as you join three separate products together, that for me makes a meal. Making a meal creates value and moves the margin back down the value chain. That allows you to be able to get into different markets. But the challenge there is, how do you set that up? Who takes the plunge? So farmer A, B and C all are investing $2 million either in their packing shed, an abattoir or whatever it might be, equipment on the farm. How do you then say, well, we've all invested $6 million individually to make ourselves more competitive? Collaboratively, would have that been to better use to create better value through the supply chain? And that's where I think this value adding and brand Australia, I think there's a massive opportunity. But it's how do you look at once, like I say, what was a competitor across the road might actually be a partner now, and start to join those. And so the challenge that we have, even as a humble packaging company, we're starting to look at how maybe we start to join those conversations together and start to bring people so that we can make products that are a little bit more value than the past. I'll get off my soapbox. But Rianju, I just, data again, as I sort of reiterate, was, you know, I've seen it as a strong theme. We within our own business are trying to look at a range of different data sort of sets and how they might affect us, even from the ordering of boxes. I sort of wanted to touch on a sensitive topic, but not too sensitive in the sense that a farmer today, you know, what are they looking at next? What do I do when I hear about this thing, blockchain? What's my next steps? You know, I might have limited bandwidth on my farm. I might not have the capability. I might be intimidated by the amount of devices I think I might. But how do I start on that journey of taking the first point and trying to collect the data, to which I think a lot of people have sort of talked about today, and then obviously the recording of it as well?
You know, the first thing is that I think data is the new gold. Basically, I know people have referred to as data being the oil. I refer to data as the new gold. It is all about how we capture the data. So, you know, over the years, I know there's every industry, every farmer out there is capturing data in some form or shape. However, they haven't got the mechanism to be able to do anything with the data. And this is where the emerging technologies, such as Internet of Things, so IoT, having devices out in the field, again, we are adding cost to the farmer, and this is about keeping the cost reducing the cost to the farmer, having the right infrastructure in place for the farmer so that we are, you know, there's multiple devices out there that are capturing, you know, soil moisture, the humidity, the diseases, the animal monitoring. But it's about how do we connect those devices and capture the data. We are limited in Australia and in New Zealand around the infrastructure that is available to us right now in getting the data uploaded, one-way communication, but also the cost of data. I mean, living in Australia and New Zealand, we probably pay the most for communication, you know, for data communication. But the data that we are capturing on our platform, on the traceability platform, the starting point for our platform is the data and validating the source of the data. You know, there's human errors involved if we're just relying on farmers. And again, you know, this is having first-hand discussions with the farmers. They keep saying that we are farmers. We don't want to be turned into technology people. And giving them a platform where they have to do minimum and then running analytics on the data that we're capturing through the installed IoT devices that are out there, getting that information back to them, running analytics on it. And we hear a lot about artificial intelligence, machine learning. These are all the future of things which we should be allowing, you know, we're now enabling our farmers, the agriculture sector, to be able to use that and simplifying that as much as we can through having a very simplified traceability platforms that can give, you know, we collect the data, we run analytics on it, and then giving that information back to the farmer in real time on their mobile phone, and they can see. And again, it's simplifying the information for the farmers. And where do they start? It is, again, you know, through forums like this. You know, we're all around here talking to us over the next couple of days and engaging with us to say, okay, where do we start? And we'll be happy to help you start and, you know, onto the journey.
Right. Paul, I suppose the one thing that keeps ringing in the back of my mind is after spending some time together and some of the pack or the challenges that you've given us as Visy to develop thermal packaging that survives a variety of supply chains. As Australia Post has started to develop and probably have a little bit more experience in supply chains that they're in, but the management of product through there. Can you sort of give a bit of background maybe just on the challenges that you've faced and how hard it is for a size of a business like Australia Post to be manoeuvrable, and if it is a challenge at all?
Yeah, and talk about how we want to make it happen. So we at Australia Post absolutely want to start delivering e-commerce food to the country. It's part of our strategy, it's part of our plan, and we think it's going to happen. We then looked at how we're going to take our assets that we've got and make that work. And probably the first challenge you realise is if you look at an Australia Post motorbike, or we've now got 1,000 tricycles or motorised scooters. We've got vans, we've got trucks. We've got about 20,000 assets running around the country today delivering. Not a single one of those has got temperature control in them, though. All right, so the leap for us to make that a temperature control network, and remember what I said before, it's all about the density. We really, after going around the world, found that the way we believe this is going to happen is via packaging. And then we surveyed our customers and said, we talked about packaging, you go to the States and what's the one thing they hate is when they get the packaging, they've got all of it and they've got to do something with it. And they hate styrofoam. And that's the solution that's in the market at the moment. So we started partnering with Visy to say, can you make us a product that we can look at a national next day product? So we want to be able to launch, and we will launch to the market this year, a product that we will offer off our national air freight network, a solution for anyone requiring temperature control using packaging to make it from point of origin to point of receipt, typically within 24 hours on the longest leg. We want to get it to about 95% of Australia. We can do that with a fair bit of our core air freight network. But we believe if we offer that to the market, there's going to be companies taking it up. We see now in our network food companies moving cheese and fish through our network. We don't know what's in it, but we know what's in it. All right, so it's happening. And our view is, let's take that and legitimise it. Let's work through the food safety elements. Let's get an accredited, known product, and also make that a product that's a great customer experience. So when you receive it, everyone's had this. You've got home, and you've got a card, and you've got to go to the post office. Yeah, it's a familiar story for people. If that's food, that process can't happen. On a Friday, if we leave it in the post office over the weekend, it's going to be a relatively poor experience for you, the consumers, and I imagine we'll get a few emails about it. So we have to change our business, but I think that's part of what we're committed to and doing based on what we see is as consumers get more comfortable with buying online, they love the convenience, they love the choice, and they get much more comfortable. When we go overseas, particularly in the States, and you see beef online is a massive business in the US. It is massive. People are very happy going on and buying a basket of goods, $120 worth of premium meat that they couldn't get at their local butcher. It happens, as well as the meal kits as well. So.
All right, thanks very much for that, Paul. We're now going to go to some of your questions. I've been having a look with the tech team backstage as your questions have been coming through, and we've had to pick down to a couple, which are the most interesting. Blockchain's featured heavily as a result of this discussion there, so we're going to have a look at what some of those questions are now and share those with you on the screen. So if we can pull those up on the screen there. The other big topic that came out was data. But the first one here I want to talk about is, as a producer, so I'll let any of the panel members pick to answer this one. As a producer, I want visibility, and blockchain could provide that. When are we going to see that happen? I mean, how far into the future is this? We've been hearing about the emergence of blockchain and its impact on all of the industries. Who wants to go with the answer for this question first?
I'll take that. So the technology is here. It's already here. There's people out there using it. But blockchain isn't, as a producer, again, let me go back to it, that blockchain isn't the solution alone. You have to have Internet of Things. You've got to have data science to be able to have the full value and the benefit of the blockchain. Sorry, I'm just reading. Do I need to?
Maybe I could just add one part there where you said the Internet of Things. I think even as a producer, don't think about blockchain as the thing. Think about the device that you're going to use. So just start and understand whether or not it's recording data through soil, whether it's data through your machinery or your crops, and then think about how that might be packed and then sent into a box, into market, what device I'm going to use, what's the recording system, how am I going to collect. So what Rianju's business will collect the data, as so to speak. So you definitely don't need a website, because websites are probably the easiest thing to create, whether it be a change letter or something on, but you need something that's going to be able to be securely transported, but then also recording, whether it be time, temperature, humidity, and or a tamper evidence piece. there's where your recording comes back to the blockchain.
And if I can get the team to pull up the second question, which actually kind of links through into this one. This is around data ownership, and I love this one from Anthony Dunn. Who owns the data? We have this continual tension point, whether it's a social media platform, whether it's DNA testing and genetics by companies like 23andMe.com, which is ultimately owned by Google. The challenge we have in society, first of all, who owns it? And the second one, which I want to add on to that, is how can we trust in the data? Because even with blockchain, and it's a fantastic opportunity to do something differently, but if we're still putting rubbish data in, we're still going to get the same outcome. So 2 questions there and one for you.
The data is actually owned by the parties that are part of the consortium. It's owned by the farmer, it's owned by the producer, and it is up to you to decide what portion of the data that we're capturing, whether it's we're using the Internet of Things devices or any form, wherever we're capturing the data from. It is up to the individual business and entity to decide how much, it's your data. We would be hosting on, or any other suppliers out there who are hosting the data for you, whether it be in cloud or on premise. The data belongs to the business that it's serving. So it's not that any other entity out there is taking the data, because you are making the decision around how much of the data you want to share. Because you'd be running analytics on it and making use of that data. You can capture all the data in the world, but what use are you going to get out of that data? The distributed ledger or the blockchain is allowing you to secure that data. So that's the beauty of the blockchain, is that that data is secured, and no one else can go in there and manipulate the data or steal your data.
Do you think, Renu, the retailers, the Coles, the Woolies, do you think surely they're going to make a play to want to own that data? Because data's our new oil in this world. It's the most valuable resource that we have. And surely the retailers, the partners, the people we work with, they're not just going to allow us to all keep this data. What's your view on that?
So following the incident that we had with Facebook, there has been a data privacy law change.
Sure.
And it is about the ownership of data, and it's our personal data. Yes, we've got Australia Post, we've got everybody that's involved in the supply chain logistics now is capturing data about us individually, about the businesses, etc. But ultimately, it is the entity that is capturing the data. They have the right to the data. They are running analytics on it. They want to know the consumer behavior. They want to know what's happening with their produce, who's buying it, who's handling it. So again, it comes down to that. It is up to them to authorize. And for me as an individual, if Australia Post, I know they've got my information around, they're going to make a delivery to me. But the data, my private data, is my data. But Australia Post has got power to the data as well, because I'm using this service, and they would be capturing my behavior of where I'm buying from, all those things. So again, it's not that our data is being stolen or taken away. We are making the decisions. We are putting the right security policies in place around how much of the data belongs to us and how we're going to store that, how we're going to share that. The blockchain, the beauty of the blockchain is that it is securing the data and making it less accessible to the people we don't want to have access to that data.
Good answer. If we can get the next question up quickly, and we're going to give a 60-second time limit on the panel here. Third question, there we go. So we've survived as consumers for decades without knowing the details of the value chain. This one is fascinating. It's around, are consumers going to be willing to pay for the extra knowledge, the extra insights into that supply chain? We're starting to see now, obviously, the trends of the consumers wanting to know more detail around what's going on that paddock to plate discussion that we heard earlier. Do we think consumers want to pay for this, or is this something they're going to want for free? 60-second answer.
I think, sorry, I was just going to say, I think if you went to Asia, they're going to want to know.
Yeah.
And I know Alice would know from her perspective, just the visibility that those guys demand, just to be able to see what it came from. Will they pay for it? I don't think it's necessarily a cost that's transferred to a consumer as such, but it's absorbed within the supply chain. So
I'm going to have to wrap it up. I'm being queued to get off stage with this. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Paul, Professor Alice, Ranaju, and Richard.
thank you.
Thank you.
So it's all about stats. It's all about data. That thing I said earlier, data is the new oil for us. It's the most important resource that we've ever had on planet Earth. In fact, our future will be defined by our ability to process not just historical data, but also real-time data. Leaders in the future, businesses in the future, the ones that truly push that innovation space, they're going to be pushing through with real-time intelligence, predictive analytics, and also that visualization of data. As we move through into our next part of the day, which we'll talk about in a second, the social media stats I've been given earlier, they've been great. We've had huge engagement. We still haven't beaten Married at First Sight, but that'll be for tomorrow, our task to do that. Professor Andy Lau, thanks for your tweet earlier, talking about how excited you are for the future and how technology is changing everything that we saw there. Simone Kane as well, one of the most exciting events I've seen, she said, globally in the space of agriculture. I think we all agree. Have you had fun here today for day one of Evoke Ag? Come on, Melbourne, you can do better than that. Fantastic. So the next part of our day is the Festival of Food, and it's a real privilege to be here in Melbourne and to be hosting a Festival of Food, and we're known for our food and coffee culture here. We've got a real treat for you tonight. One of the things that I'm actually looking forward to is the molecular whiskey. So it's the first whiskey that hasn't been developed in a distillery. It's been created in a laboratory. I've been told about this for the last couple of weeks. We've been super fortunate to get you a sample of this. In fact, this is actually a world first for us. It's coming all the way from Endless West, and you'll be given an opportunity to try this later on. If you have got any jackets or coats in the cloakroom as well, please make sure you do get them before you go through to the Festival of Food, because the team are going to be reorganizing these couple of room areas here, getting ready for tomorrow, and you won't be able to get your stuff and get back in here before tomorrow morning. There's heaps of other things as well. Grasshoppers, seriously give those a go. I had some of those earlier. They're pretty delicious. Add a bit of lime and chili to them. They're pretty tasty things. And put the photo up on Instagram and make sure you tag hashtag EvokeAg. Thank you so much for your participation today. You've been an incredible audience. I've loved all of the interviews we've done on the cameras out there this morning. There's heaps of content being put on by the team onto social media. So make sure you get on there, have a look at what's been going on outside of the groups that you've been in. And also, one more time, get onto the app, get onto Braindate. This is the first time you've been in a room with over 1,000 like-minded individuals. If you've got a problem, share it on Braindate. As long as it's not too personal. Put that problem on Braindate. See who else can help you to solve that problem. If you've got an idea, get onto Braindate. Share what your idea is for the future. You will never have this opportunity again in such a vast amount of talent that we've got here, and you can use that then for when you leave and have finished after the second day. Thank you so much once again. Thanks to the panel, and see you all tomorrow morning.